Thank you very much. That was very good. Does anybody have any questions at the moment?
Hi, this is Eric Fry at the Alaska Department of Education.
Yes.
Thanks for your presentation. To be honest with you, I do have a question. I looked at the Massachusetts ELA curriculum framework from 2001. Mm-hmm. And what I see there, if I'm not misreading it, is you folks have informational texts for reading and writing starting pre-K through kindergarten, running through all the grades. So who did you imagine was going to teach the informational text in all those grades?
You will see that informational text K through 8. That's where it belongs. And that is indeed what elementary teachers, it's a very good question, by the way, because the distinction needs to be made between literary texts and informational texts. But that is what elementary teachers in K through 6, maybe a little bit more than that if you have reading teachers in middle school, but they've always done that. They have used their textbooks in history, geography, even sometimes textbooks in language arts or science, whatever textbooks they have in addition to whatever children's literature they read in the ELA class, but they've used it to teach how to read a table of contents, how to look at bold-faced headings, what are appendices, what's a glossary, all the things that are features of informational, and I should say textbooks, informational textbooks. So it's always been there in the elementary grades, and it is in the Massachusetts standards. And we've separated it according to the features, and we were very careful about what the features were. But by the time you get to high school, particularly, 9 through 12, you don't see informational text. You see what high school English teachers have always taught, which is nonfiction. And we were told by English teachers in Massachusetts, and I don't think Alaska's English teachers are frankly very different, that English teachers have always taught to some degree some speeches, some biography, and some essays. Brit-Lit, whether it's British literature or American literature, we always, at least in Massachusetts, studied a little bit by Henry David Thoreau, a few Emerson essays. They're all in anthologies. But yes, that's nonfiction. But it was not studied as informational text, and it was never up to 50% of the literature curriculum.
Well, but that raises the question, at the secondary level, why wouldn't you expect history and science teachers to be assigning challenging reading and writing and to be able to judge their students in that? In other words, why do you think only English teachers are the language arts teachers?
No, I think just the opposite. I would expect history teachers to be assigning primary source documents. And if they're teaching our basic seminal documents that were written in the 18th and 19th century, they're not easy reading. Federalist Papers is actually required by Massachusetts statute. That's
but isn't that what
the kind of
new
reading
standards,
they should be doing.
But aren't the new
sorry,
standards?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm saying, aren't the new standards saying that at the secondary level, it isn't just the English teachers who are going to be dealing with reading and writing skills? Everyone has to get on board. I mean, isn't that one of the big problems in our high schools? I had 2 kids who went through public high school, and they did very little reading and writing, even in history class.
Yes, that is a problem in the history class. But remember, these are standards for the English class. The document
I don't see where it says that it's the standards for the English class. It's the standards for the school. It says English language arts. It isn't standards for the English teachers. It's standards for how you deal with English language arts in the schools.
The title is English Standards for the English Language Arts, and then literacy standards for, forget the rest of the long title.
Right, yeah, I know what you mean.
Technical subjects, history, science, and technical subjects. But there are 64 pages or so in that document, and all but 9 pages are English language arts standards. They are for reading or English teachers. They're not for teachers in other subjects. That's why the test is going to be a test of reading, and it's going to be dumped on English teachers. There is no way we know of yet. Now, this is all hypothetical because we haven't seen the test, but there's no way that accountability can be assigned to teachers of other subjects on the reading test. NAEP has the same problem. The ELA teacher, the English teacher, is the one who is held responsible for what happens in grade 11 or 12 on the NAEP reading test. So these are for English language arts. There is a footnote that says, yes, I know that famous footnote, the footnote that says you want informational reading going on across the curriculum. Of course we do, and it needs to be in science and history and so forth. But it has to be part of the subjects they're teaching. This is part of the problem. The English teacher is not qualified to teach the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, but you sure want the history teacher teaching it in context.
Well, I think it depends on how it plays out in the schools, but it was certainly intended that this would dramatically change the way secondary schools run, that you can't just stick the English teacher with everything.
Yeah, but they are. That's the whole point.
Well,
They're
we don't
asking
see
the
it that
English
way.
teacher to
Depend
teach
on,
50.
I don't see how
don't
schools
read it
can
that
meet
way,
these
then
standards. Well, it'll be up to each school, I suppose, but I don't see how they can meet it by expecting the English teacher to do all this.
Then how,
they aren't the
let
standards.
Me ask,
they aren't standards in how to teach English literature, although they include some reading and writing for that. It's the whole world of language arts: grammar, vocabulary, composition, speaking well. It's debates in class and discussions. Did you think all of that was going to take place in the English class?
I agree with all of that, but if you look at the way the reading standards are divided, just look at the beginning of the document.
Right.
There's a big category called reading, and the reading standards are divided into 10 for informational text and 9 for literary text, and it goes from kindergarten to grade 12. That's what I call, and others have called, the 50-50 mandate. About 50% of reading instructional time will be for something called information, and less than 50% of reading instructional time will be for literary text. This is in addition to all the other things that I agree with you, grammar, vocabulary, and so forth, that teachers have to teach in the English class. Does nothing to change that.
Yeah, what I saw in the Alaska standards is K to 5, 11 pages on reading and 6 on writing. And then when you get 6 to 12, it's 8 for each. And then those literary standards are 4 pages reading, 4 pages writing. So I don't know that there is such an overwhelming emphasis on writing as perhaps in the original Common Core. I'm not sure. You seem to be counting individual standards, and maybe I'm counting the pages that they're on. I don't know.
Oh, well, I don't count
mean?
pages. I count the number of standards on a page. Some have more standards than others. But the document I was given the link to, and that's all I can tell you, the document I was given a link to, that is what Alaska seems to have adopted, is identical, so far as I can see, in terms of the actual standards to what is in Common Core.
Okay,
now,
well, that's just a difference in what we're counting. I was counting pages, and you were counting up the standards. But it could be if a person breaks down writing into a different number of entities, you would end up with more standards in writing. But there's still quite a bit of reading in the standards.
There is reading, of course, because I'm telling you, there's 10 of one kind and 9 of another for K to 12. And then there is a pile of writing standards. But when I happen to count grade by grade the number of writing standards in Common Core as opposed to the number of reading standards, which would be 19 at every grade level, because that's how it breaks down, 10 and 9, there were more writing standards than reading standards at every grade level. You'd have to literally count the standards. I mean, it's not hard to do, but you'd have to spend the time just counting them up. But that was what I was given as the new Alaska standards, that they're basically identical in terms of the actual standards to what is in Common Core. The text surrounding it is different, and that I'm not prepared to say exactly how the text differs, but you've still got the same standards that Common Core, so it has the same problems that Common Core has, which is this very arbitrary division between informational text and literary text for 50% of the time that an English teacher spends in the classroom teaching reading. Now, that's not to say I agree with you with what they're doing in the other subjects, but that's in addition.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is Barbara. So, what are the implications then for? We had some I think we had some fairly effective English standards and writing standards in Alaska. I taught ABE, which means I taught ABE for 5 years in this state. I taught the writing, and so what that means is I got everybody who dropped out or either fell by the wayside in the educational system, or maybe they were homeschooled and sort of fell into the GED program to get that document to go onward with their lives. And very rarely did I get, if they were from Alaska, very rarely did you have somebody who tested below the 9th grade level on the test of adult basic education. And I could get almost everybody through the writing with a 1 or 2 day review. Now, those who came from other countries or other states is another matter, but almost uniformly, the Alaskans required very little additional work, except for, like I said, except for those who were outside. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out.
What is your question then?
My question is that you right. So my question is this an erosion of what we had before, from what you could tell?
So far as I can tell, Common Core represents a step backwards for every state that adopted Common Core, no matter what the condition of its standards were. Certainly it meant more than many steps backwards for Massachusetts. I would have to examine Alaska's earlier standards more carefully to say with some detail what the issues were, but there are such basic flaws in Common Core's standards that any state that adopts Common Core has adopted its flaws. That's the point I'm trying to make. You've got strings attached. You've got a test called college readiness in grade 11, that means that students who are deemed to have passed this test, which will be a test that determines whether they are, quote, college ready or not, can therefore go on to a post-secondary institution and take credit-bearing freshman courses in math or whatever. Now, it eliminates the remediation that has been growing in community colleges, and I don't know your statistics in Alaska, but I suspect that you probably have a rate of remediation in mathematics in your community colleges that you're not happy with. Most states, including Massachusetts, are not at all happy with their remediation rates at the college level. This gets rid of it because the kids have been determined to be college ready, and as part of the agreement in using Common Core, or the compact that they then have with higher ed, which is in the works in many other states. I don't know what's happening in Alaska. Now, this may be very different, and that the person who's in your Department of Ed may know more about this, certainly, than most other people do. But there's a compact in many states that if you go to a community college, the courses that you take for credit can be transferred to the 4-year publics that you have in your state. I don't know what Alaska has, whether it has a compact agreement between community colleges and 4-year publics or the university. This is different in each state across the country. All I'm trying to suggest is that if Alaska has not entered into a contract with CCSSO for its tests, and I don't know where you are in terms of what testing consortium you belong to. Have you joined either Smarter Balanced or PARCC?
SBAC.
SBAC. I believe that if you are part of that testing consortium, you must work on getting an agreement with your post-secondary or higher ed institutions so that students who take your Smarter Balanced test in grade 11 and are deemed to have passed it. Remember, this is all hypothetical because we don't have that test yet, and we don't know what the cut score is going to be. So we're talking about the future. But if they pass the test, they are marked or labeled college ready, and they are to be able to go to a higher education institution and take for credit the next level of coursework in mathematics, which is what mathematicians are now looking at, because it turns out that it may be college algebra or a version of Algebra 2 that is considered by many mathematicians to be remedial Algebra 2. I'm not a mathematician. This is just what they tell me. But the point is that there's a string attached to your higher education institutions. This is, by the way, one of the major goals of Common Core. That's why they were called college-ready standards. The idea was that students who are deemed college-ready by the grade 11 test could bypass, if possible, your high school graduation requirements, if you have specific ones in Alaska. Many states do. Most states do. And go right to
we have an exit exam here.
Oh, you have some states are already getting rid of their exit exams. If they're going to have a grade 11 exam based on Common Core that determines college readiness, they're going to get rid of their exit exam and align their freshman college courses to the readiness exam, which mathematicians say, this is what they tell me, means a step down. It could be a large step down, because it will mean going down to less than Algebra 2. But you have to speak to your own mathematicians at your own colleges to understand what they use for the placement of students who go into a community college or a four-year college or a university and take a math course. I don't know what your high school requirements are. That is part of the picture. How many students have to take trigonometry? If they want to go to an engineering college, most engineering colleges in Massachusetts, almost all of them require students who have completed and successfully passed trigonometry. What's the story in Alaska?
Well, what I can tell you in Alaska, what we've had since 2010 at least, is we have had a two-part system. You have the Anchorage district was basically on the Common Core standard. The rest of the state largely was not. Prior to, and Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, up until this past year or so when we passed these standards, Alaska had grade level expectations and the SBA and the exit exams. So that meant that I believe local districts had a lot more autonomy. And in Fairbanks, there was a very strong commitment by a team of four of us who kind of, I don't want to say we policed it, but we were very much on top of what was going on in the math classes, and we actually were on top of. I hate to say we were on top of this, but we had to be. Because we had 4 or 5 teachers who had worked their way up from Anchorage up here, and they were teaching the non-standard algorithms, and so that became kind of a team effort on the part of many of us to try to get as many of those students to help them through up to the next level. So at least when they went to the university, the way I would get them is the university would refer them over to us. Another colleague of mine, the way he got them is when they ended up in juvie. And
where? I'm sorry.
Juvenile hall. When they got in trouble, because obviously.
All right, but let me ask you if you know whether higher education faculty, and perhaps the person from the Alaska Department of Education would know this, were higher education faculty in mathematics, science, and engineering invited to comment on the math and science, or the math standards that are part of Common Core, or whatever math standards you adopted? I didn't look at them, and I'm not an expert, but the experts might have been invited. I don't know. Were they?
Eric? I guess he's not here now.
Oh, all right.
Okay, he must have left.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, or the English faculty, English or reading faculty, were they invited not the ed school faculty, because they don't teach freshman courses at most universities or community colleges. So you want to get your humanities faculty, history, English. Did they comment on the strength of the college readiness level? I don't know.
Yeah, I do know that that the Gates Foundation gave a large chunk of money to the University of Alaska, and I know that it's discussed that they are doing the validating to the Center for Education Policy Research in Anchorage. I am unfamiliar with who is there, but that's Department of Education. That's
All right,
the education. That's the education faculty, not the
okay. That's the problem.
Faculty. Yeah,
that's precisely the problem I'm trying to point to when I go to various states. Were your content, your academic faculties, asked to look at these college readiness standards because they're the ones teaching freshmen? It's not the education faculty that teaches college freshmen. I don't know why they're even involved. It makes no sense to me. And that's something that your group or anyone who's there listening should be finding out about. Now, what may be better in Alaska, by the way, than elsewhere in the country is that if you haven't entered into any formal contract that the governor hasn't signed or the commissioner of education hasn't signed a contract to use Common Core standards, although you are going to be using Smarter Balance tests, the question is whether you have to have these agreements with higher education about college readiness. I'm not sure that Alaska is free from the strings attached if it is part of Smarter Balance.
It's my understanding, Senator, as you know, I told you my background was actually at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks up here. It's my understanding that some of the education faculty have been, and some other faculty have been involved in doing some things, because I've gotten a few inquiries on some research that I did about 5-6 years ago on the actual structure of the university classes, because when the university rolled over to a new what they call the core curriculum at the university. There was this core curriculum movement back in the mid-'90s, I think it was, during the Clinton years. We arranged the university classes, and I was part of the faculty that was involved in that. So my name kind of
the question though is whether
there must be something going on now, because nobody would randomly just run into that stuff. That was some old rusty, dusty things, and they said they were having.
The question, though, is whether there are engineering, science, and mathematics faculty involved in looking at these new standards for college readiness at the high school level. And are there other people there who have questions, who come from other backgrounds? I mean, I don't know who else is listening.
Does anybody have any questions? Just go ahead and hit *6. That should unmute you. Okay, so I'll go ahead and ask something then. Where do you think we should go from here as far as...
Barbara, I have a question.
Okay.
This is Maria. It's about something that I've heard as I've been looking into this, and that is that Agenda 21 is related to this curriculum, and Agenda 21 is sustainable development. And just specifically, is there... are any of the objectives of sustainable development, social equity, economic prosperity, environmental justice part of this curriculum?
There may well be that in the materials, but I'm not prepared to say that the Common Core is allied to Agenda 21. It may or may not be. That isn't what those of us who have been speaking against Common Core are looking into. We're just looking at Common Core as it is Common Core, and we don't go beyond that. The curriculum materials seem to raise a lot of problems for parents, and I think that if I were to give you any ideas or suggestions or recommendations as to where to go or next or what to do, would be to have parents get together and tell you what kinds of lessons they're seeing in the English language arts class, what kinds of readings. And particularly at the high school class, I would want to speak to, I think it would be useful to find out from English teachers, are they reducing the amount of literature they've signed in the past, and what are they adding in the name of informational text in the English class? Now, the person named Eric, who was here from the department, didn't seem to have much to say about what English teachers were doing in informational reading. We both agreed that it should be taking place in other subjects, of course, science, history in particular. But I don't know. We haven't any information, and it's not systematic. I think that you need to hear from, maybe there's a state affiliate of the NCTE in Alaska. That's what I would be trying to contact and find out what Alaska's English teachers have been given as guidelines, directives from the State Department of Education. I don't know that you know that, and Eric would have been possibly someone to give you that kind of information if he had it. I don't know what his role is. Do you have, for example, an English language art specialist in your Department of Education? Do you have a mathematics specialist in your Department of Education?
I know that there used to be. I don't know that there is anymore. They've had some reorganization, so I'm not certain as to individual roles. I know with Eric, I know he is the guy who usually I end up interfacing with him on FOIA requests, so Freedom of Information Act requests. So that's my principal level of interaction with him.
Okay. I think it's useful for, if you have any group at all, you should be somehow in contact with your legislators and parents. Parents need to be providing information on the lessons that are being given that are called Common Core aligned. That kind of material is flooding into the schools, and there's no way any one person could be on top of it. So parents are the best way to get information on what are the lessons that are now being given to kids, particularly in K through 8, that are called Common Core aligned. What's happening in the math class? Now, there you can speak to math teachers. I mean, you've got to get information from people in the schools.
Right. Well, this just was adopted after the legislature went on a session. So what we're trying to do is, I know what's going to happen. Okay. I mean, I've already seen in 2 districts the new books coming in. So, and I've already had teachers call me and go, "Oh no," because they know what they're going to face from the parents, and so they're quite naturally, and they don't particularly like what they're seeing either. So,
but we need to have descriptions of what it is that's going on. In other words, if there's going to be any useful information for a reporter or someone else to talk about, what is it that they're seeing? Not their attitudes about it, but what literally are the kids being asked to do in math, and what are they being asked to read in English? There's got to be some specific details. Otherwise, nobody knows what we're talking about.
Right. And I think quite a few of the teachers are still quite, they're a little fearful of doing much in the way of talking on the subject, because they just, this is, first, it's new, and second, a lot of them are being told to not talk about it, so, which is kind of new up here.
Well, teachers have a problem speaking up, and critically, everywhere. I learned that in Arkansas, and it's true in many other places. Teachers are almost told not to speak on matters of curriculum instruction in public, so parents are left in the dark except what they see their own kids doing. There are very few meetings that I've heard about where principals try to explain to parents what Common Core is going to mean to them. So a lot of this is, what is the information that's being given? And you have a small state with a relatively small population. What is your Department of Education giving as directives in English and math? Just focus on those 2 areas, because those are the Common Core standards that have been, it seems, adopted by Alaska, even if it's been given a different name and called the Alaska Standards. I didn't see that there were any significant differences with what the links that you gave me.
Right. I think the big difference is the word "with scaffolding" was added to a couple of the standards in English.
Okay, but that's minor.
Right.
That's early grades.
Right, and that just means with help, right?
Yeah. So there's an adult, the teacher, who's helping. But you've got to go to the high school level because that's where the meat is. That's where the beef is, to use an old cliche.
Right.
You've got to go to the high school level because it's the link between college readiness and college that is what college readiness standards are all about. Remember, the title of the document is about college readiness standards in English language arts. So while there are problems in the lower grades, you've got to go to the high school level and find out, in both English and in math, what's happening in the high school English classes and in the high school math classes.
Well, I know as a history teacher, I would be mortified if I found out that I was suddenly being evaluated on some literacy standards that I knew nothing about. So I can't imagine how they're going to be able to put this onto the history teachers when they start doing the evaluations, because for a history, especially a high school history teacher, you had no role in that student's development until they hit your history class. And you weren't trained to teach literacy. They were supposed to read by the time they got to you. I would presume so. I think that for a lot of, if the informational text standards are going to be applied on history teachers, I would think that that's going to be a very big shock to the history teachers.
But they're not. That's the whole point. There are literacy standards for history teachers, but the test that is being developed is for English teachers. The reading test is for English teachers, not history teachers. And we don't know what kinds of informational passages English teachers are going to be asked to be responsible for.
Right. No, I agree.
We don't know yet because we haven't seen we've only seen a few sample items. That's part of the problem. Now, there's piloting going on. I don't know if students in Alaska are contributing to the piloting or not. Does anyone know?
And I don't know if anybody knows or not. I have one other question. There's a lot of people who think that parental choice is going to somehow save their parental choice legislation would somehow save their children or save their family from this Common Core curriculum, or the Common Core standards, I'm sorry, or the whole CCSI movement. If they are all state funded, though, would that indeed then save or exempt somebody from the CCSI? Do you know of anywhere where that's happened?
Well, I can only tell you in general, and it depends on state law, which differs from state to state, that while people think that charter schools, parochial schools, sectarian schools are going to be able to have different kinds of curricula because they may or may not have to take these tests, voucher students accepted into private or sectarian schools may lead to the Common Core, whatever is used as the Common Core test and the curriculum that is the support for the test, there may be less choice than parents think. This is something that homeschoolers are beginning to worry about, that eventually by the high school level, if they want to have their kids get into a public college, they'll have to conform to a Common Core curriculum. And the Catholic schools in this country, there's a lot of Catholic parents who are now upset across this country because it turns out that Catholic superintendents and principals have been adopting Common Core even though they don't have to because of the separation of church and state. But it means that their schools are using the same curriculum that's in the public schools, and if it's an inferior curriculum, because the standards are inferior, they may not have to take the tests, but they're not going to be able to escape by the time they go to high school. They may have to take the college readiness test for their kids to go to public colleges. So it may affect all of education. The GEDs have been aligned with Common Core. The military base schools have been aligned with Common Core. ACT tests have been aligned with Common Core. David Coleman has said that he's aligning SATs with Common Core. So if everything's aligned with Common Core, how does one get a different and a better curriculum for one's children? It doesn't look like it's going to be easy.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't look very easy at all. Um, if you were an Alaskan parent or legislate, well, let's take it as a legislator. If you were an Alaskan legislator, what would you be looking at here within? Say you were on the education committee. What would you be?
There were several. That's a very good question. There are several things I'm recommending. One I've mentioned earlier: ask for a committee of higher ed faculty in the arts and sciences. Your math, science, literary scholars, engineering faculty, particularly engineering. And Alaska should have, I'm sure, must have one engineering college. I just don't know your higher ed system in Alaska. But
yeah, we do. We do.
You want to get those people looking at these standards and giving recommendations to the legislature about what they think college readiness means. So that's one recommendation, that the legislature can request a set of a review by their own higher ed faculty on what their own higher ed faculty want for admission to credit-bearing courses in their own universities and colleges in the state. That's one thing. The other thing, which is more drastic, is to pause funding implementation of Alaska's Common Core standards. Now, it's a little trickier in Alaska because they're not called Common Core. They're called Alaska standards. So even though they are almost identical with Common Core, the legislature would have to say, let's pause implementation of Alaska's Common Core-based standards. This is what's happening in Indiana right now. Governor Pence signed a bill because it was recommended and voted on by the Senate and the House and by their Commissioner of Education to pause implementation of the Common Core in Indiana because they had adopted Common Core. Michigan is having a hearing, which I will be going to this week, on whether to fund again in October implementation by the State Department of Ed of Common Core. They paused it a couple of months ago, and Snyder agreed, their governor. But now they've got to decide whether they should continue funding it or change altogether and get out of Common Core. So pausing implementation until you get further information from your higher ed faculty, not your ed school faculty. That's got to be clear. It's got to be the faculty who teach freshman courses in math and English. I can't think of anything better than for legislators to start getting their higher ed people to look at these standards which impact what they are going to be teaching in colleges and universities in each state.
Okay. Let me also ask you, when you were in Massachusetts, what were some of the things that your state implemented that had a major impact on what came out of Massachusetts? For many years, I know that your students were top ranked.
Yeah. Right. And that's a good question that's been asked a lot, particularly of me. What were the factors that led to the Bay State students doing so well on NAEP tests, grade 4 and grade 8, in reading and in math, and on TIMSS, the Third International Mathematics and Science Survey, the international tests of curriculum? What did I do when I was in the department for almost 5 years? I also not only made sure we had created a set of first-class standards in all major subjects, but I tried in every way possible to upgrade teacher training, teacher licensure, teacher regulations, and professional development for teachers. And getting a more academically able teacher corps is, to me, the secret for improving public education in this country. I don't know really anything much about your licensure tests in Alaska. I don't know whether you use praxis tests. I think you probably are a praxis state, but I'm not absolutely sure. But the praxis tests have not been strong tests. And in this country, we have been doing the opposite of what most other countries, industrialized countries as well as others, do. Other countries take for teacher preparation programs the top 20%, if even less, for their teacher preparation programs In this country, we take the bottom third of the college cohort. This is well known and documented in several studies. We take the bottom third for particularly the prospective elementary teacher. In other countries, like South Korea, it's the top 5% who are allowed into elementary education programs. We've got to raise the academic bar. If you want higher standards taught or more rigorous standards taught, you have got to raise the bar on the teachers who can teach to them. And this is what I did in Massachusetts. I had control over the licensure tests, turned out, and I was able to rewrite the teacher licensing and administrator licensing regulations because I was asked to do that by the commissioner and the board. So I made sure that our very strong standards were put into all of these other things, and the whole academic structure of public education was upgraded. So it's no one piece. It's coordinating all these major pieces that may make the big difference. Yes, you have to have money for poorer communities, and you have to make sure that students in low-income communities have teachers who are as qualified academically as teachers in upper-income communities. But all of that can be handled through your licensure regulations and your licensure tests.
Okay. That sounds like a good thing to look at then, I guess. I know what used to be, but I don't know what currently is. Does anybody else have any other questions? I don't want to monopolize this here. If you hit *6, that will unmute you if you are muted. *6 mutes you and *6 unmutes you. If nobody else has anything, I have one other one. The one thing I looked at when I looked at these standards is when I think about standards, I think about, for example, each child should by the end of grade X know the following, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't notice any of that in these standards. Is that something that you typically see in standards, something I call it content standards? These seem to be more skill set
That would
standards.
depend upon what grade level you're looking at. That might be common in very early math standards, but I don't know that you would ever see anything like that in high school standards.
Right. Well, I guess
you have to distinguish levels of education and what your expectations are for the content of what you want students to study. You might have, it's very common in math in the elementary grades. Students learn to count by 3s or 4s or divide by 2-digit numbers or 3-digit numbers. You have some specific things like that in the early grades. But that isn't how your high school standards are ever described.
Right. Well, I guess what I'm thinking is I was looking at some of the literacy standards for informational texts, if you will, okay, that were in there. And I guess I was thinking, I know at one point we had, in social science, we had standards, and it had the student will know, be able to define the following terms by a certain grade.
Well, it could be in a standard, it might not be. I mean, I don't know what significance it would have necessarily. That's all I'm saying, because it would have to, I would want to see what else is in the rest of the standards to know what that in itself would mean. I'm not going to be able to stay much more than for a few minutes, but it'll be 4:30 my time, and I have to be getting ready for something else. So
right.
I just want to say if there are other final questions or comments, fine.
All right. Well, I appreciate you very, very much taking the time and being able to do this. This has been really the first effort on our part, I think, to really have something statewide. We have had a couple other people that were book authors, but we didn't really get into the meat of the standards that Alaska had. We were still trying to figure out where they came from.
Right. Well, I think you need to get some. You need some help from your State Department of Ed people, because it's not clear to me. you need one legislator at least on your side who's interested in the topic, and to get a bill going, and that will then pull out all the people pro and con.
Right.
Get a bill of some kind going, and that will get everybody into the act.
All right. Well, I appreciate very much you taking the time. Like I said, we spent so much time just getting the documents and I guess going through this whole denial with the administration that they adopted the Common Core and whatnot, and it's been for us very frustrating just to even, get them.
Well, think about where you want to go. Get a purpose for yourself.
Right.
You might want to consult with the Truth in Education blog. There's a lot of good information on the Truth in Education blog. That's all one word. And there are the Anti-Common Core blog will give, or there's some site for Anti-Common Core materials, model legislation. You'll find all of that available on the web. And you need one legislator who is sufficiently interested and concerned about the non-transparent process by which most of this was done, and the loss of possible control by Alaska parents and legislators of their own education system, that will give you some sense of where to go. So I wish you all good luck, and hope that you can be in touch with some of these other people who have extensive networks that will provide you with a lot of useful information.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. Bye-bye.